In this video, we're going to look at the final one of the ideologies that is covered in Unit 3, and this is anarchism. Previously, we looked at liberalism, post-Enlightenment ideology, and an abstract theory about human nature and human behavior based around the ideas of rationalism, freedom, and individualism. Then we looked at conservatism, pre-Enlightenment ideology, except for the neoliberal strand. Did not subscribe to abstract theories about human behavior and believed in human imperfection and organic society and the need for tradition, hierarchy, order, and pragmatism. Then we looked at socialism, another post-Enlightenment ideology, again, very rational-based ideology, another abstract theory about human nature and human behavior. One of the core themes of socialism we've seen was equality, but socialist rationalism led it to a very different place than liberalism. Socialism is based on the idea of collectivism rather than liberal individualism. And finally, we're going to look at anarchism, another post-Enlightenment ideology. It's also rational, but in many ways it's a hybrid ideology, although it has a number of core themes of its own. The strands are really a hybrid. Anarchism can be seen at the extreme end of both liberalism and socialism, where both ideologies meet if taken to their logical conclusion. Absolute freedom for liberalism and a final withering away of the state for socialism. And both conclusions reach the idea of a stateless society. So the learning outcomes for this video will be to know and understand the core themes of anarchism, anti-statism, utopianism, anti-clericalism, and economic freedom. And the first one is anti-statism. Anarchists have an extremely optimistic, even utopian view, as we shall see, of human nature, and believe that in the absence of authority or power-based relationships, we would naturally be cooperative, sympathetic, and sociable. While Acton's warnings about power acknowledge different levels of corruption, as in only absolute power corrupts absolutely, and creates the possibility that corruption can be constrained through constitutionalism, anarchists reject this approach. Paraphrasing Acton's warning about power, anarchists would argue that power in any shape or form will corrupt absolutely, and all systems of rule are absolutely and equally corrupt. To be an authority, or to hold power at any level, or to any degree, is to acquire an appetite for even more privilege, power, and control. Similar to socialists, anarchists believe that human nature is plastic or malleable, and that we can be either good or evil depending on the political and social circumstances in which we live. People who would otherwise be cooperative, sympathetic, and sociable become nothing less than tyrants when raised above others by whatever means, especially authority. And a particular focus of anarchist criticism is the state. And they see the state as both evil and undesirable, and for 5 key reasons. Because the state is seen as the ultimate repository of sovereign power, compulsory power, exploitative power, and coercive and destructive authority. Any one of those would be bad enough, but as the state is the ultimate repository of all 5, it's nothing less than anarchists would say a concentrated form of evil. So the anarchist opposition to the state in any way, shape or form is absolute. And this total opposition to any form of state is one of the key separators between anarchism and both liberalism and socialism. The original socialist argument against a rejection of the state was that it was merely an agent of class oppression. However, the anarchist rejection of the state is based in terms of human corruptibility. Power corrupts absolutely. A further division is that following the overthrow of capitalism, some socialists argued for the need for a proletarian state, the dictatorship of the proletariat, in order to protect the revolution and prepare the way for a communist society, which would eventually be stateless. Anarchists totally reject any notion of any state, proletarian or otherwise. As the slogan in the clip art says, when the government's boot is on your throat, whether it's a left boot or a right is of no consequence. They accept no state, whether it's a left-wing state or a right-wing state or a proletarian state, it doesn't matter. The state is simply evil and undesirable. Anarchists also reject the liberal view on constitutionalism and consent. Whereas liberals believe that humans, we cannot have freedom without a state to protect our natural rights, anarchists believe that humans cannot have freedom with a state. Even extreme classical liberals would argue for a minimal state as a necessary evil. For liberals, the dangers of the state itself becoming a tyranny over the individual, absolute power corrupts absolutely, this can be protected against through mechanisms such as constitutionalism and the idea of democratic consent obtained through free and fair elections. Anarchists reject both these arguments. Firstly, constitutionalism is simply ineffective as the absolutely corrupting nature of power means that state power is absolute evil and it's simply untamable. Secondly, the idea of consent is a sham. It merely, according to anarchists, recruits people to collude in their own oppression by concealing the real nature of state power. The second core theme of anarchism is that of utopianism, because anarchists not only view the state as evil and undesirable, but they also view it as unnecessary through their utopianism. Utopianism is the belief in an ideal or perfect society grounded in a belief in the unlimited possibilities of human nature. The term utopianism can be used in an idealistic or positive sense, or it can be used in a pejorative or negative sense. Utopianism, in a positive sense, envisages a future society of peace, freedom, and harmony, which is attainable, according to anarchists, because human nature is inherently rational and altruistic. As human nature is plastic or malleable, if we are placed in the right social conditions or removed from the wrong social conditions, we will respond accordingly. Utopianism in the negative sense, such as that held by liberals and conservatives, they would argue that such ideas are simply unrealistic and unattainable. They're deluded and fanciful because they are based on an overly optimistic view of human nature. Anarchists, of course, would deny such a skeptical or negative view of human nature merely as the product of socialization and of the corrupting nature of the state and authority systems that anarchists seek to overthrow. If we put the first two core themes together, the anti-statist argument and the utopian argument, we can see that both of those together would answer two different questions. One, why do anarchists see the state as undesirable? Because it's the ultimate repository of sovereign, compulsory, exploitative, coercive, and destructive authority. And a second question, which sounds similar but is slightly different, is why do anarchists view the state as unnecessary? Well, they view it unnecessary because we don't need the state because human nature is inherently rational and altruistic. And as an anarchist Godwin argued, social order arises naturally and spontaneously, and in the absence of the state, a future society will be one of peace, freedom, and harmony. Anarchists are, however, as you'll see later on, split over what the future stateless society would look like and what are the correct social conditions. For collectivist anarchists, they envisage a society based around common ownership and mutualist institutions, and these nurture values such as respect and harmony, while individualist anarchists would support the use of market relationships. The third core theme of anarchism is that of anti-clericalism. And Bakunin, who's always good for a quote in anarchism, says, as long as we have a master in heaven, we will be slaves on earth. And the anarchist objections to organized religion coincide with broader criticisms of authority in general. Firstly, the anarchist case against religion is that religion is often seen as the source of authority itself, with the idea of God or a God representing a supreme being who commands unquestionable authority and clearly then impinges on individual freedoms. Anarchists also suspect that religious and political authority are hand in hand, with religion being one of the pillars of the state, which propagates an ideology of obedience and submission to earthly and spiritual rulers. Bakunin again proclaimed that the abolition of the church and state must be the first and indispensable condition of the true liberation of society. And the third case of the anarchists against religion is that religion seeks to impose a set of moral principles on the individual, requiring conformity to standards of good and evil, thus robbing us of moral autonomy to make our own decisions. Paradoxically, anarchism itself can display a very mystical even spiritual conception of human nature and indeed the world, similar to Buddhism or Taoism. The fourth core theme of anarchism is that of economic freedom, or the economic structure of society. And it is this which has exposed the main tensions within anarchism between collectivist anarchism and individualist anarchism. Collectivist anarchism, drawing on socialism, exhibited distaste for private property and equality, and their vision of a stateless society is an economy or society based around communist aspirations, cooperation and collective ownership. Individualist anarchists, drawing from liberalism, support property rights and use of competitive capitalism. Their vision of a stateless society is an economy or society based on market relations and private property. Despite this disagreement, you can say both strands oppose the managed capitalism of Keynesianism of the post-war era, with collectivist anarchists arguing that this merely propped up a system of class exploitation, gave capitalism a human face. Individualist anarchists argue that managed capitalism merely distorted the free market and created economies dominated by monopolies. Both strands also oppose Soviet-style state socialism. Collectivist anarchists argue that state socialism was an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms, as the state merely replaced the capitalist class as the main source of exploitation. Individualist anarchists, on the other hand, see state socialism as a violation of property rights and of individual freedom. In the two clip-arts, you can summarize it as anarcho-capitalism advocates the elimination of the state in favor of individual sovereignty in a free market. Interestingly, anarcho-capitalists reject the socialist view that the state was merely an agent of class oppression, part of the superstructure. For them, the state and also capitalism, there's nothing wrong with capitalism. Monopoly, in the saying goes, which is the worst aspects of capitalism, is the child of the state, not the father. For anarcho-individualists, it's the state or state authority that's the problem, not capitalism. For anarcho-communists advocate the abolition of the state, markets, money and private property, and capitalism in favor of common ownership of the means of production, and so on. So that concludes our four core themes of anarchism: anti-statism, utopianism, anti-clericalism, and economic freedom.